If you're anxious, listen to this story. Toby was no ordinary cat, though his grey fur and slender frame might suggest otherwise. He lived in the heart of a bustling city where the air buzzed with endless activity. The roar of engines, the clatter of footsteps, and the occasional blaring of sirens painted his world in constant chaos. Life in the city was an endless sprint, and Toby, with his sharp green eyes, was always on edge. He was a stray, darting through alleyways and narrow streets, always watching his back. Toby's days were spent scavenging for scraps and avoiding humans who often saw him as a nuisance. His nights were even worse, filled with dreams of looming threats and sudden dangers. Rest was a luxury he rarely allowed himself. Even when curled up under the shadow of a dumpster, his ears twitched at the slightest sound, ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Despite his sharp instincts, Toby felt trapped by his own caution. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow loomed large, and every passerby was a potential threat. His heart often raced, his breath quickened, and he found it impossible to relax. Food, safety, and shelter were all temporary victories, overshadowed by the ever-present need to stay alert. It wasn't just the city's dangers that plagued him. It was the storm raging in his own mind. Even in moments of stillness, Toby's thoughts swirled with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. What if that dog returned? What if the garbage truck came earlier today? What if there was no food tomorrow? These questions were relentless, turning every quiet moment into a battlefield of anxiety. One cold evening, Toby perched on the edge of a rooftop overlooking the glowing city lights. Below, humans rushed about their lives. Cars honked impatiently, and the occasional shout echoed through the streets. Toby stared down, his tail flicking nervously. He envied the birds that soared high above the chaos, free from the noise and fear that ruled his life. But it wasn't all despair for Toby. Deep within his heart, buried beneath layers of worry, was a longing for something more, a dream of peace, of freedom from the constant vigilance. He didn't know what peace looked like, but he imagined it as a place far away from the city, a place where he could finally exhale without fearing what might come next. Little did Toby know, this dream would soon spark a journey that would change his life forever. A journey that would take him far from the city streets and deep into a world he couldn't yet imagine. Toby's days in the city dragged on, each one more exhausting than the last. The cluttered streets and ceaseless noise were no longer just a nuisance. They were a weight pressing on his chest. He had grown weary of constantly looking over his shoulder, his claws digging into the pavement as he darted from one hiding spot to another. The city had become a cage, and its bars were forged from his own fear. One grey morning, as Toby prowled along a narrow alley searching for food, he overheard a conversation between two scruffy street cats perched on a fence. Their voices were low, but one word stood out to Toby: forest. His ears perked up. "Out there it's different," said the larger of the two cats, his whiskers twitching as he spoke. "No honking cars, no growling dogs, just trees, quiet and endless space. They say you can hear your own thoughts there." Toby's heart skipped a beat. The idea of such a place, a world free from the city's relentless chaos, seemed almost too good to be true. He edged closer, careful not to draw attention to himself. "But it's far," the other cat warned, her tail curling tightly around her paws. "And dangerous. You'd have to cross roads, fields, and who knows what else to get there." Toby hesitated, his paws frozen in place. The prospect of leaving the city was terrifying. He didn't know what lay beyond the maze of streets he had called home his whole life. Yet, as the two cats continued their conversation, the idea of the forest planted itself firmly in his mind. The thought of finding peace, even if it was just a distant possibility, was enough to ignite a spark of hope. Over the next few days, Toby couldn't shake the image of the forest. He imagined towering trees, swaying gently in the wind, their leaves whispering secrets to one another. He pictured a soft bed of moss beneath his paws, the warmth of the sun filtering through the canopy above. Most of all, he dreamed of silence, not the uneasy quiet of an alley at night, but true, serene stillness. But the more he thought about the forest, the more his doubts crept in. Was it real? Could he even make it there? What if he left the city only to find something worse? These questions gnawed at him, but they couldn't extinguish the tiny flame of hope burning in his chest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Toby made his decision. The city had taken enough from him, his energy, his peace, his sense of safety. He couldn't bear to stay another day in its suffocating grasp. With a deep breath, Toby resolved to leave. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of determination. Somewhere out there, beyond the concrete and steel, was a chance for peace, and Toby was ready to find it. The night Toby left the city was colder than usual, a sharp wind cutting through the narrow alleys. He took one last look at the skyline, its jagged silhouette framed by countless glowing lights. For a moment, doubt gripped him. This was the only world he had ever known. Could he really leave it behind? But then, a memory of the two street cats surfaced, their words about the forest echoing in his mind. With a flick of his tail, he turned away and began his journey. The first steps were the hardest. Every street Toby crossed felt like a gauntlet, each sound a potential threat. Cars rumbled past, their headlights sweeping the pavement like searchlights. Toby stayed low, his muscles tense, darting from shadow to shadow. A barking dog sent him scrambling under a fence, his heart pounding in his chest. Yet despite the dangers, he pressed on. As he moved farther from the city center, the landscape began to change. The towering buildings gave way to smaller houses, then to open lots and fields. The air felt lighter, and for the first time in years, Toby caught a hint of something unfamiliar. Earth, grass, and the faint, sweet scent of flowers. It was both exhilarating and unsettling. The road ahead was not without its challenges. Toby's first night outside the city was filled with uncertainty. He found himself in a patch of tall grass, the blades swaying gently in the moonlight. It should have been peaceful, but every rustle made his fur stand on end. Was it the wind or something lurking in the shadows? He barely slept, his nerves frayed from the unfamiliar surroundings. As the days turned into nights and the nights back into days, Toby's confidence grew. He began to trust his instincts more, learning to differentiate between harmless sounds and genuine threats. He discovered streams where he could drink fresh water and bushes laden with berries he cautiously nibbled on. Still, the journey was grueling. His paws ached from the rough terrain, and his thin frame felt the sting of hunger more acutely than ever. The turning point came when Toby encountered a wide, busy road that seemed impossible to cross. Cars zipped by in both directions, their engines roaring like beasts. He crouched at the edge, his eyes darting back and forth, searching for an opening. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, but he couldn't muster the courage to move. Just as despair began to creep in, Toby noticed a small family of rabbits further down the road. They waited patiently for the right moment, then darted across in swift, coordinated bursts. Inspired by their bravery, Toby took a deep breath and followed their lead. His paws barely touched the ground as he sprinted, the wind rushing past his ears. When he reached the other side, his heart was racing, but he was alive, and the road was behind him. That night, Toby found a quiet spot beneath a tree and curled up for the first time with a sense of accomplishment. The forest was still far away, but he was closer than he'd ever been. As he drifted into an uneasy sleep, the stars above seemed to whisper encouragement. For the first time, Toby felt a glimmer of hope that he was on the right path. The forest's edge finally came into view after what felt like a lifetime of wandering. Toby stood at the boundary, where the golden rays of the sun filtered through the dense canopy. It was breathtaking. The forest seemed alive, every tree and leaf whispering in a language he couldn't quite understand. Yet, instead of the calm he had imagined, an unexpected wave of unease washed over him. As Toby stepped into the forest, the cool earth beneath his paws felt different from the hard asphalt of the city or the rough fields he had crossed. The world was quieter here, but not silent. Birds chirped high above, branches creaked in the wind, and the rustling leaves seemed to murmur secrets. This was supposed to be the place where Toby could finally find peace, but instead, every sound felt amplified, his senses sharper than ever. He treaded cautiously, his body low to the ground, ears swiveling at every noise. The openness of the forest was both freeing and overwhelming. Back in the city, he could predict the dangers: a honking car, a barking dog, a human footstep. But here, the unknown surrounded him. What was that distant crunch? Was it a predator, or just a branch breaking under its own weight? Hours passed, and Toby's anxiety only grew. The forest was vast, with no clear paths or landmarks. The dense foliage cast shadows that shifted with the breeze, forming shapes that played tricks on his mind. His heart raced as he imagined predators lurking just out of sight. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. As night fell, the forest transformed into a place of shadows and whispers. Toby found a hollow beneath the roots of a large tree and curled up, but sleep would not come. The darkness felt oppressive, and every sound sent a jolt through his body. He closed his eyes tightly, trying to steady his breathing, but his mind raced with fears. What if he had made a mistake? What if the city, despite all its chaos, had been safer than this? The truth began to dawn on Toby. The forest itself was not the source of his unease. It was his own mind, still gripped by the patterns of fear and vigilance that had ruled his life in the city. He had carried the chaos with him, and it clung to him like a shadow. By the second day, exhaustion began to take its toll. Toby stumbled through the forest, too tired to notice the beauty around him. The towering trees, the golden shafts of sunlight, and the gentle calls of birds were lost on him. All he could think about was survival, finding water, avoiding imagined threats, and keeping his guard up. As he rested by a stream that evening, Toby caught his reflection in the water. His fur was ruffled, his eyes wide with worry. The cat staring back at him looked like a stranger, one who didn't belong in the peaceful forest. For the first time, Toby questioned whether he could truly find peace here. The forest wasn't the problem, he was. With a heavy heart, Toby realized that escaping the city had not been enough. If he was ever going to find the calm he sought, he would need to face the chaos within. On his third day in the forest, Toby's restless wandering brought him to a sunlit clearing. Exhaustion weighed on his every step, but the serenity of the space caught his attention. A soft breeze rustled the leaves, and the golden light filtering through the canopy seemed to embrace the clearing in a warm glow. Toby sat down, his tail curling around his paws, and let out a weary sigh. As he gazed into the trees, a sharp caw broke the silence. Startled, Toby's ears flicked, and his eyes darted to a gnarled branch above him. There sat a large crow, its feathers sleek and glossy, its dark eyes fixed intently on the weary cat. "You look troubled," the crow remarked, its voice raspy but filled with curiosity. Toby blinked, unsure how to respond. He had met few creatures in the forest, and none had spoken to him until now. I suppose I am," Toby admitted, his voice low. The crow tilted its head, hopping closer along the branch. "The forest should bring peace, yet here you are, carrying the weight of the world on your back." Toby's tail twitched uncomfortably. "I came here to escape," he said. "The city was too much, too loud, too dangerous. I thought I'd find peace here, but—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't feel any different. My thoughts won't stop and everything still feels wrong." The crow nodded knowingly. "Ah, yes, the storm within." It flapped its wings and glided down to perch on a rock near Toby. "Peace isn't something you find in a place, little cat. It's something you must make no matter where you are." Toby frowned, his whiskers twitching. "I don't understand. How can I make peace when my mind won't stay quiet?" The crow's eyes gleamed with an ancient wisdom. "The first step is to stop fighting the noise. Sit with it, listen to it, and let it pass. You've been running for so long, you've forgotten how to simply be." "Sit with it," Toby repeated, dubious. Be repeated. "Sit, breathe, and focus on what is here and now," the crow explained. "Feel the earth beneath your paws, hear the wind in the trees, smell the air. The forest speaks in whispers, but you've been too loud inside to hear it." Toby hesitated, glancing at the ground. "What if I can't do it? What if the noise never stops?" The crow gave a soft chuckle. "The noise isn't your enemy, little cat. It's part of you. When you accept it, it will lose its power over you." The bird hopped closer, its beak glinting in the light. "Try it now. Close your eyes, breathe deep and listen." Reluctantly, Toby did as he was told. He closed his eyes and inhaled, the cool forest air filling his lungs. At first his thoughts swirled as they always did, memories of the city, fears of predators, doubts about his journey. But as he exhaled and listened to the sounds around him, something shifted. The wind rustled gently through the leaves, a bird sang in the distance, and the ground beneath him felt solid and grounding. For a moment, the storm inside quieted. When Toby opened his eyes, the crow was watching him with a faint smile. "There, you see, peace is not the absence of noise, but the ability to find calm in the midst of it." Toby's heart felt lighter, though he knew the journey ahead would not be easy. For the first time, he glimpsed a path to the peace he sought. Toby's days in the forest began to change after his encounter with the crow. Though the old bird's advice seemed simple, it stayed with him, echoing in his thoughts as he roamed beneath the towering trees. The forest no longer felt quite so threatening, though it still challenged him in unexpected ways. Each morning, Toby practiced what the crow had taught him. He would find a quiet spot, sometimes near a stream, other times on a patch of sunlit moss, and sit still, listening. The first few attempts were frustrating. His mind would wander, dragging him back to the city's chaos or conjuring fears of unseen predators. But Toby persisted, returning his focus to the sounds of the forest, the babble of water, the rustle of leaves, the occasional chirp of a bird. Slowly, the storm within him began to calm. One afternoon, as Toby rested by a stream, he noticed something he hadn't before, his own reflection. The face staring back at him was no longer the same wide-eyed, fearful cat he had been when he first entered the forest. His green eyes were still sharp, but there was a softness to them now, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. Encouraged by this small change, Toby began exploring the forest with new curiosity. The places that had once seemed ominous, the dense thickets, the shadowy groves, now felt alive with possibility. He realized that the more he practiced being present, the less his fears controlled him. The forest, once overwhelming in its vastness, became a source of comfort and wonder. One day, as Toby lay beneath a tree, he caught sight of a butterfly fluttering nearby. Its delicate wings shimmered in the dappled sunlight, their vibrant patterns mesmerizing. Toby watched it land on a flower, its movements graceful and unhurried. For the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled. The butterfly's simplicity taught him something profound. Life didn't need to be rushed. Each moment held its own beauty if he was willing to see it. Toby began to notice the smaller details around him, the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, the earthy scent of the forest after rain, the gentle hum of insects. But the transformation wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when Toby's old fears resurfaced, gripping him like a shadowy hand. When the wind howled through the trees or an unexpected noise startled him, he felt the familiar pang of anxiety. Yet instead of fleeing or freezing, Toby remembered the crow's words, "Sit with it and let it pass." In these moments, Toby closed his eyes and breathed. He allowed the fear to exist without letting it consume him. And just as the crow had promised, the feelings eventually faded, leaving behind a deeper sense of calm. The days stretched into weeks, and Toby's transformation continued. He no longer felt like a stranger in the forest. He had become part of its rhythm, moving with the flow of its natural cycles. He learned where to find water and which berries were safe to eat. He discovered sunlit clearings perfect for resting and cozy nooks that shielded him from the rain. More importantly, Toby discovered a part of himself he hadn't known existed, a core of resilience and peace that no external chaos could shake. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Toby climbed a small hill overlooking the forest. He gazed at the expanse of trees stretching into the horizon, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had come to the forest seeking peace, but what he had found was something far greater, a sense of belonging and a quiet confidence that could guide him through any storm. As the weeks turned into months, Toby's life in the forest flourished. What had once been an intimidating wilderness now felt like home. The towering trees, the soft rustle of leaves, and the songs of unseen birds were no longer sources of anxiety but companions on his journey. He moved with ease, his steps quiet and deliberate, as though he had always belonged here. One crisp morning, as Toby padded along a familiar path, he heard a rustling in the underbrush. He paused, his ears twitching toward the sound, but he felt no fear. A small rabbit emerged, its nose twitching as it cautiously approached. Toby lowered himself to the ground, his posture relaxed. The rabbit studied him for a moment before continuing on its way. Toby smiled to himself. Months ago, his presence might have frightened the rabbit, or he might have startled it with his nervous energy. Now, his calmness seemed to ripple outward, touching everything around him. The crow, who had appeared sporadically since their first meeting, landed on a branch above Toby. "Well, look at you," the bird croaked, tilting his head. "A cat who's learned to quiet the storm." Toby chuckled softly, his tail curling around his paws. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, "but you were right. Peace wasn't something I had to find. It was something I had to create." The crow gave a satisfied nod. "And now, you've not only found peace, but become a source of it. That's the real magic, little cat. Calm spreads, just like fear does." As the days passed, other creatures began to notice the change in Toby. Animals that once avoided him now drew closer, sensing the tranquility that radiated from him. Squirrels chattered nearby without scurrying away, and birds sang in the branches above him. Even the shy deer grazed peacefully in his presence. Toby had become a part of the forest's harmony, no longer an intruder. One evening, Toby sat on a rock overlooking a small glade, the sky above streaked with the colors of dusk. As he watched fireflies dance in the gathering twilight, a profound realization settled over him. The peace he had sought had always been within his grasp. The forest had shown him how to uncover it, but the journey had been his own. Peace, he thought, isn't a place or a thing. It's a choice, a way of being. From that day forward, Toby became a quiet guide to others who wandered into the forest. When a lost fox or a nervous sparrow crossed his path, he would sit with them, his presence a reminder of the calm they too could find. Toby never spoke much, but his stillness and gentle demeanor spoke volumes. Years later, Toby's story became a whispered legend among the forest's inhabitants. The cat, who had once been ruled by fear, had transformed into a symbol of serenity. His legacy wasn't one of grand deeds, but of quiet strength, the kind that inspired others to find their own calm amidst the storms of life. Moral of the story: peace is not something we chase in the world around us, but something we cultivate within ourselves. By learning to sit with our fears and embrace the present moment, we can become a source of calm, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. And so, Toby's journey ended not with an escape from the chaos, but with the understanding that true peace was never about the forest. It was about the choices he made within his own heart.